exemption from steel tariffs that was granted early in the year as well. We'll look at the implications further with our expert guest in the studio later. But first, let's get the latest headlines with Devin Whiting at the News Center. Devin?
Hi, Jang-ho. We'll start at the Blue House, where President Moon met today with the leaders of Korea's 17 local governments. It was the first meeting of its kind since the local elections in June, and they talked about ways to boost job creation and revitalize the economy. Shin Se-min reports.
President Moon Jae-in and the heads of 17 provincial and city governments put their heads together on Thursday to come up with ways to churn out more jobs and breathe life into the economy, starting with the local level.
우리는 소속 정당이 다를 수 있고 또 일하는 무대가 다를 수 있지만 대한민국을 함께 발전시켜 나가야 하는 국정의 동반자입니다.
President Moon was firm on the idea that cooperation between central and local governments is crucial.
이제 패러다임 자체를 바꿔야 할 때입니다. 일자리 사업을 지역이 기획하고 주도하고 정부는 평가 지원하는 상향식 또 소통적 방법으로 전환해 나가야 한다는 생각입니다. 일자리 사업 재원을 지자체가 더 많은 재량을 갖고 또 책임 있게 운용할 수 있어야 지역의 특성에 맞는 다양하고 창의적인 사업이 가능할 것입니다.
And although the regions came to the table with different backgrounds in terms of their regional characteristics, they are all planning to pursue the central government's economic plans, which fall under 7 categories. Those projects, which will also be backed by the relevant ministries, include inter-Korean business cooperation, improving the lives of the people through better infrastructure, and supporting small and mid-sized businesses. Pinpointing the need to move away from the top-down policymaking process, the president called for a more fruitful bottom-up communication process instead, and proposed holding meetings like this on a regular basis. Though the president is pulling out all the stops to be a jobs president like he had promised to do so, time will only tell what progress he's made, starting with the next jobs report. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
And the South Korean government says it will keep close tabs on the country's overheated real estate market and has vowed stronger action against speculation. The government agreed to this in a high-level meeting Thursday with the presidential office and members of the ruling Democratic Party of Korea ahead of next week's regular session of parliament. They also agreed to take preemptive measures to curb consumer prices ahead of the Chuseok holiday next month and provide financial support for the self-employed and for small business owners during that period. They also plan to hold such high-level meetings once a month and hold closed-door meetings every week. President Moon has nominated replacements for 5 of his government ministers in what would be his first cabinet reshuffle. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Chung Kyung-do, has been chosen to take over as defense minister, replacing Song Yong-mu, who's been stuck in a difficult situation over the mishandling of controversial information regarding the Defense Intelligence Unit. For trade minister, the president nominated Sung Yoon-mo, who currently heads the Korea Intellectual Property Office. Ruling party lawmaker Yoo In-hae has been tapped for Minister of Education. A former Vice Minister of Labor, Lee Jae-kap, has been picked to lead that ministry, and another ruling party lawmaker, Jin Sun-mi, has been nominated for Minister of Gender Equality. All the president's picks will have to undergo parliamentary confirmation hearings, although their appointments do not require parliamentary approval. Now, as for relations between North Korea and the U.S. and the uncertainty that's emerged, many are blaming Pyongyang for dragging its feet on denuclearization. But a U.S. media outlet reports that President Trump may have made Kim Jong-un a big promise of his own during the Singapore summit, one that he has so far not followed through on. Lee Ji-won has more.
U.S. President Donald Trump reportedly promised North Korean leader Kim Jong-un that he would end the Korean War during their historic summit in Singapore back in June. U.S. media outlet Fox, citing multiple sources familiar with the negotiations, reported Wednesday that President Trump told Kim that he would sign a declaration to end the war soon after their summit. But since then, the U.S. has been repeatedly urging North Korea to take more concrete actions for its denuclearization, more specifically handing over 60 to 70% of its nuclear warheads within 6 to 8 months. Fox says this is likely what brought about the deadlock and the increasingly hostile response from the North. One of the sources told Fox that President Trump, having promised a peace declaration, but then making it conditional, would seem as though Washington is reneging on its commitments, and it makes sense why the North Koreans are angry. While the White House declined to comment, State Department spokesperson Heather Nauert said she's not familiar with that being part of the overall agreement, but once again reiterated the U.S. believes denuclearization has to take place before anything else. Despite the skepticism and doubt, likely aggravated by President Trump's cancellation of his Secretary of State's visit to Pyongyang, the president once again reiterated that he's on good terms with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Speaking at the White House on Wednesday, President Trump said the U.S. is doing very well with North Korea, but he pointed to China as one of the reasons for the current stalemate with the North.
China is the route to North Korea. 93% of the product and various things that go into North Korea go in through China. And I think that China makes it much more difficult in terms of our relationship with North Korea. Now,
President Trump praised Chinese President Xi Jinping and China in general, but said that with the U.S. losing hundreds of billions of dollars a year to China, he had to straighten out their lopsided trade relationship. 이지원, Arirang News.
And more mixed messages from the Trump administration. Defense Chief James Mattis said this week that the U.S. has no plans to keep suspending war games on the Korean Peninsula. It had called off a big one just this month as a goodwill gesture to Pyongyang. But just a day later, President Trump signaled that he might like to see more drills suspended because of how much money they cost. Park Ji-won has more.
U.S. President Donald Trump tweeted an official White House statement on Wednesday evening local time, saying there's no reason to be spending large amounts of money on the joint South Korea-U.S. war games. The statement continues that Trump believes his relationship with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is a very good and warm one. But it's just Trump can instantly start the joint military exercises again with South Korea and Japan, and if he does, the exercises will be far bigger than ever before. The statement also criticized China for not pressuring the North enough onto the path of denuclearization. The statement came only a day after U.S. Defense Chief James Mattis said Tuesday that the Pentagon had no plans at this time to suspend any more exercises on the Korean Peninsula. The comment was made at a press briefing at the Pentagon, and Mattis added that no decisions have been made on whether large-scale joint military exercises like Ulchi Freedom Guardian and Full Eagle will be conducted next year, and that any decision would be made in consultation with the U.S. State Department. The U.S. Defense Chief also issued a follow-up statement earlier Wednesday that said the Pentagon's military posture has not changed since the Singapore summit, and no decisions have been made over the exercises, leaving room for possible cancellations. Mattis also said only 3 military exercises had been suspended to allow space for a diplomatic approach to negotiations with North Korea. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
I'm Devin Whiting, and those are your news headlines.
Now, when President Trump announced he would be imposing tariffs and quotas on steel and aluminium imports earlier in the year, it sent shockwaves around the world. South Korea reacted quickly and became the first nation to be granted an exemption from the tariffs, although with limits. However, those quotas have now been lifted as well. Good news for Korean steelmakers perhaps, but why now, and what does it suggest about Trump's other protectionist measures? We'll break it down with our expert guest right after this report by our business correspondent Kim Hye-sung.
President Trump has signed proclamations allowing targeted relief from steel quotas for some countries, including South Korea. The U.S. Commerce Department said Wednesday local time that President Trump, who in March put in place tariffs of 25% on steel and 10% on aluminum, signed proclamations permitting relief from the quotas on steel for Korea and Brazil and on both steel and aluminum for Argentina. The statement added that companies can apply for exclusions for products when there is insufficient quantity or quality available from American producers, and that if an exclusion is granted, then no tariff would be owed. Korean steelmakers, represented by the vice chairman of the Korea Iron and Steel Association, Lee Min-chul, welcomed the news, saying this means Korea, the third largest steel exporter to the U.S., can ship more than the quota Seoul and Washington had agreed upon. In March, Korea was given a quota of about 2.68 million tons of steel, or 70% of the annual averages shipped to the U.S. between 2015 and 2017, in exchange for an exemption on steel tariffs. The quota took effect in May.
The Trump administration likely made this move because U.S. steelmakers are slowly feeling the pain of rising steel import costs. So it's granted this targeted relief to some of its allies on steel products that America cannot produce or otherwise really needs.
The announcement from the U.S. Commerce Department follows prolonged negotiations between Korean government officials and local steelmakers and their U.S. counterparts about allowing exemptions for some Korean steel products. Which specific products, though, still has to be negotiated. Kim Hae-sung, Arirang News.
We have joining us now Professor Shin Sang-hyuk from Kyung University to break us the latest developments down for us. Thank you for coming back on the show today.
My pleasure.
Now, as we just heard in that report, it's been announced that the Trump administration will be lifting the quotas on steel and aluminium imports from South Korea. What does this mean, really, for South Korean steelmakers? Good news, I'm guessing?
Yes, certainly it is a good news for the Korean steelmakers. Of course, Korean steelmakers have really concern about the very protectionist trade policy of the United States government. And they have prepared to minimize the potential damages in their business with the United States. Well, in the middle of those kind of concerns, this must be a very good news. But one thing which I want to underline is that Korean steelmakers, after the report about the USA government new trade policy on steel, the industry and aluminum industry, the Korean steelmakers have very aggressively contacted with the American counterparts. They try to persuade the USA government through the American business partners. And certainly the American business partners, they also recognize some potential difficulties caused by the protectionist USA government policy toward the Korean steel products and aluminum products. And then certainly there will be the midterm election in November. On the part of the Mr. Trump administration, they should listen to the voices from the industries. Steel industry is one of the key industries in the USA. And then the USA industry, according to the report, they have asked the USA government to change their very protectionist trade policy toward the steel and aluminum products. I think we can understand the change of USA policy toward steel and aluminum products this time in this context.
You've mentioned there the actions that South Korean steelmakers made. So is that why South Korea is one of these countries that has been given exemption? Or is there some other kind of political play here as well?
I think so. Along with the Korean and Brazilian, the steelmakers also get the benefits from this decision. And then the Argentine, the aluminum producers will be on the list of the benefits from this decision made by the USA government. If I added up some analysis, including the political consideration, as you well very well, right now the USA has the trade war with China. And certainly China seems to be the main target of the new very protectionist USA trade policy. And when the USA government started the trade war with China, to avoid the criticism, I mean, they are focusing on targeted only to China. They also started to trade war with the European Union and even the third world countries such as Korea and Brazil and Argentina. But I think the USA government made it clear what kind of the goal they have in implementing such a very protectionist trade policy. So by having a negotiation with the European countries, Korea and Brazil and Argentina, they can reduce some kind of burden in implementing such a kind of very protectionist trade policy. That means that it can be understood as more burden on the Chinese government.
By having these kind of tariffs and these quotas before, but then suddenly taking them away and having negotiations take them away, doesn't that kind of defeat the purpose of having these tariffs in the first place? The US, they said, that the Trump administration was very much America first, we're going to be protectionist, but then they're going back. It seems that they're going back on some of their promises.
Well, certainly this is a very important point. I mean, lack of consistency, you know. I mean, USA government, well, for example, started the trade war with China early this year. And in the trade relationship with China, they kept on some consistency. For example, they imposed the $34 billion of Chinese goods, imposed the 25% tariffs. And additionally, they also decided to impose the 25% tariffs on $16 billion of Chinese goods. And they even hold the unprecedented 6-day the public hearings on the plans to impose the $200 billion of Chinese products, which will go into effect in September. So they kept on. USA government kept stepping up the pressure on the Chinese government. But in the relationship with other countries, right? As I already explained, in the trade relationship with the European Union, certainly they started negotiation. To discuss about the trade issues. Certainly, I think that the USA government, there's a high possibility that USA government will change their stance toward the European industries. In the same context, as we discussed before, USA government seems to change their very protectionist trade policy toward Korea and Brazil and then Argentina. So certainly we can classify the USA stance into two categories. One is toward China, they kept in consistency, but to other countries, they have shown some big changes on their stance toward those countries.
I guess we see that in the latest negotiations with Mexico as well. They say they're going to scrap NAFTA, but it's pretty much the same deal that they're having, but with Mexico. And now they're going to try to get Canada involved as well. They're in negotiations as well.
Well, as you know very well, the USA, Mexico, and Canada are member countries of NAFTA. Well, according to the report, USA government finalized the trade deal with Mexico. That means they should start the trade negotiation with Canada. So it means that politically they got score. For the November election, it can be very, very favorable. Good news for the Trump administration. But I think about the report that this can be leeway for, to step up the pressure on the Chinese government in the trade war. USA government, yes, I think so. USA government will take advantage of this, the deal with Mexico to twist the arms of the Chinese government with a strong strength. So I think it's a very complicated one, but certainly this is not the only trade issues. USA is competing with China to get the hegemony power in the region. So definitely USA will keep on stepping up their pressure on Chinese government until China will accept the demands from the USA. Of course, the Chinese government has officially said that they will not accept the demands from USA without the enough talks about the trade issues with the USA. But I think practically speaking, considering the economic foundations, USA has stronger foundations than Chinese economy. And then if I give you a figure, out of total US exports, the American government, the imports from China, USA government can impose up to $500 billion Chinese products. How about China? Out of the total China, they can impose the tariffs up to $150 billion. That means that in terms of the total imports volume, there are big differences, So if the situation goes on for a while, definitely the economic damages, burden, which the USA government will bear and then Chinese does, definitely Chinese government seems to take the heavier burden on the economy. So if time goes on, China will seek for the solutions more faster than the American government.
I'm guessing that's why the Trump administration right now don't have really intentions to really try to negotiate with China. Even Trump himself, he said that it's not the right time to talk with China right now.
The right time means, for the Americans' perspectives, you have to accept our demands first, and then with those kind of new stance, return to the table, negotiation table. Then we will be able to talk. That's the American stance. But how about the Chinese government stance? Chinese government stance, no, we will not accept the demands from USA without full considerations. We have our thought and we have our situations. So we have to start talk and negotiation about this one with the American government without any, any preset conditions. Set by the USA government. We will not have a talks. That's the reason why the two officials of the two governments have the talks to solve the trade war between two countries, but they have failed to produce the very fruitful, the concrete outcomes. That's the reason, because that two governments has two different stance about this issue. So without compromising these differences about this issue, practically speaking, I think it will be very difficult to find a solution between two countries.
One more topic before we go as well. Trump in the last few days has mentioned a few times that negotiations with North Korea are not going well because of China and because of the trade dispute with China. Do you think China is really interfering with North Korea because of the trade dispute? Or put it a different way, if the US and China weren't having a trade dispute, would China not be interfering with North Korea?
I think it's like a coin which has two sides. On the part of China, definitely they want to strengthen the relations with North Korea, and they must consider, strengthen the relationship with North Korea as a way to to change the American stance toward trade war. But Mr. Trump has emphasized that because of China, particularly after the second meeting between the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and then Chinese President Xi Jinping, Mr. Trump said that North Korea was changed. So that's the the whole responsibility for the current situation is lying on the Chinese government. But Chinese government officials said no, we never. They did not accept it. So what I'm talking about is that according to the report in the September 9th, there was a report that President Xi Jinping was scheduled to visit to North Korea to celebrate the event in North Korea. But I doubt whether he will go there right now, because if he visits to North Korea, then USA president and USA government will step up their criticism against the Chinese government. So Chinese government should have to consider the gains and losses which they will have from the President Xi's visit to North Korea. Why I'm explaining this one, this is the one aspect showing the relations between USA and China and North Korea. The USA used the North Korean nuclear issues to step up their pressure on the Chinese side. Chinese government also tried to use the North Korean nuclear issues to reduce the pressure imposed by the USA government on their government. So we have to wait and see, but it's not very simple. It must be very complicated. And we have to think about gains and losses which South Korean government will get from those kind of situations. Because, we have to discuss about the current issues and then potential issues with the USA government and North Korea. And then, possibly maybe we have to talk about these kind of situations with China. But all situations are intertwined, so it's not very simple. So, anyway, we have to, be very careful, and we have to prepare which one is which can be the best solution to overcome the current situation.
Yes, everything is very much tied up between those 3-4 countries there. Thank you for your insights today, as usual, and we hope to have you back next time as well.
My pleasure.
That's all from us here for now, but do tune in again for our later newscasts, and you can catch up on all our latest reports as well on our website, arirang.com/news. Thank you for watching, and hope you can join us again next time. Goodbye.